Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, folks, welcome back. Nightmare Success. It's where you come. What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Well, as you all know, I love stories where somebody goes through their own nightmare and they discover their passion and they use that passion to help other people and improve the community and make the world better. And I've got a guy, Joe Robinson, who is that type of person. And to give you, and for those out there who like the show, just want to remind you guys, subscribe, follow, leave reviews. It just helps the show. I appreciate it so much. So what about Joe Robinson? Well, I want to give a shout out to Nathaniel Evans, who connected me to Joe, and I got to talking to Joe, and I love his story. I love what he's doing. I want to tell you a little bit about him. So Joe Robinson is the founder of Mindful Money. It's a personal finance education company dedicated to transforming the lives of people impacted by the criminal legal system through a unique blend of mindfulness, cultivating an ownership mindset, and smart money management. Joe's passion for his mission is deeply rooted in his own life experiences. Joe hails from the rough and tumble heart of the East New York, Brooklyn neighborhood that bore the brunt of the cracks era's devastating impact during his formative years. This turbulent environment not only forged Joe's resilience, but also exposed him to the harsh realities of economic disparity and consequences of financial illiteracy. Joe's journey was profoundly influenced by a period of incarceration, an experience that ignited a fervent desire to reach out to those who find themselves in similar circumstances, grappling with a myriad of obstacles and challenges upon release. It's the unwavering commitment to improving the financial well-being of this segment of the population that fuels Joe's relentless pursuit of normalizing conversations about money. Joe's nationally recognized book, Think Outside the Cell, An Entrepreneur's Guide for the Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated, has been a beacon of hope and knowledge for many seeking a path to financial independence and success. I love all that. That is, so needed. So a big part of what we need is education for people to get right with their mindset, their money, and their education about how to handle that money. Can't wait to unpack all that. But before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Autoplaza Direct, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car. And then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a trip to the dentist. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle of getting a car. It's called Autoplaza Direct. They are your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Autoplaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Joe Robinson, thanks for being here today. Welcome in, my man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brent. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to go into this. You've got a story, and it's quite a story, and you're using everything about what's happened to you throughout your journey, and you're helping people, which I love. That's, that's what this show is all about, is what do you do when you handle your worst nightmare? How do you get through it? How do you survive? Take us back a little bit. What was life? I know you grew up in the hard tumble life of the New York boroughs, but what was little Joe doing in that world?
Yeah. So I will say this. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, mostly East New York. We did live in other parts of the city, but mostly Brooklyn. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. There's 5 of us at the time. We lost a sibling, but it's 5 of us with my mom. right? Primarily. And then at some point, my grandmother became like a surrogate mom, basically. But so I like to say that there was one, I experienced one life, so to speak, from when I was born till I was 15. All right, so I was born in 1970. So in 1985 is when my life changed, my entire family's life changed, uh, because crack hit the scene, right? Hit New York City by storm. And yeah, as a 15-year-old, I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I knew things were changing. I knew that when I was in high school, I was in the 10th grade, and I remember going to school and seeing crack paraphernalia like littered about in the streets. And I'm like, I mean, it was all over the place. It was crazy. I talk about this in my memoir, which will be published next year, but um, I remember, like I said, I'm 15. I remember women 19, 20-ish or something like that, like propositioning me for sex, for crack. So I knew something was different.
Something's going on.
Something is going on. I had never experienced anything like that before. Of course, I'd keep going to school, but this is like en route to school, like early in the morning. They like, proposition me. So I'm like, what the? And I would see these crack vial people look differently. They walk differently. And so that was, like I said, in 1985. Prior to that, we grew up you know, poor working class family like any other family, where we lacked in material things. There was a lot of love in the house, right? So there was a wealth in that way. Um, and I'm the oldest of five. My mom doted on me and always told me how smart I was and how much, I can accomplish if I put my mind to it. And that has
Yeah.
stayed with me to this day. I'm 53.
Yeah.
It still stayed with me. But in 1985, it changed. It changed. I mean, literally, our lives turned upside down. We went from living in, with our mom in like tenement buildings to then moving around in shelters, homeless shelters. And I would always like go hang out with my friends or go other places because I just didn't want to be in that space like that. So she always had a hard time like like tracking me down because I didn't want anything to do with that.
Joe, what caused that? What caused the shift from being in a more of a normalized environment, even though it
Yeah.
was poor? But how did you get that shift to homeless shelters?
Yeah, well, because in 1985, I'm not sure exactly when, but my mom began dabbling with crack, started abusing. I tell the story also in my memoir about how, because I was the oldest, she would have me babysit. And so once when I was babysitting, at this time we had moved from Brooklyn to Harlem, actually.
Okay.
So we were in Manhattan. And I remember being in her bedroom. One of my favorite movies was An Officer and a Gentleman, right?
Love Officer and
Uh,
Gentleman.
yeah, I love that movie. I mean, I would watch it over and over again. I wanted to be a pilot. That was partly why I loved it. Now, I didn't want to be a naval pilot. That was about the Naval Academy, but I wanted to be go in the Air Force and be a pilot. And so I love the movie. Louis Gossett Jr., Richard Gere. I just
Oh
loved
yeah,
it.
it's all about grit. It's all about getting and staying with it and not giving
Right.
up.
Exactly. Despite all the discomfort, the frustration, the challenges and all that. And and then plus there's the love story part of it. But again, I was just a teen, so that's not what really stood out for me,
Yeah.
that part. But once I was babysitting it, and I was in my mom's room watching the movie because she had the color TV. We had black and white. This is way back, right?
Yeah.
So I want to watch it in color, right? And as I was putting, I mean, you probably know, this is long before Netflix and all this other stuff, right? So we had the Betamax, the VHS tape cassettes and stuff. And so as I was returning the movie, the tape, I bumped into, this is in my mom's room. I bumped into, I think it was like a jewelry chest or something like that. And by accident, I bumped into it and out came crack vials. And I was like, holy crap. I was like, this is the same stuff I see in the streets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was devastating. In my mind, I said, you know, and I hate to say it like this, my mom passed away in 2019, and we've talked about it since then.
Mhm.
But I said, my mom is one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was devastating. It was devastating. And so I thought it was a secret at first. I didn't tell any of my siblings. I was like, okay, you know, and I'm mentally, I was grappling with it. And
Sure.
we grew up in a family where, like, I don't know about now, but growing back then, like in African American families, like you couldn't question your parents. Like it was like an unspoken thing. So I couldn't
Yeah.
be like, Mom, hey, I found
What's
these,
going on?
I couldn't do it. So I felt, I don't want to say trapped, but I didn't know what to
Yeah.
do.
It's
Right.
awkward.
And so I just kept it to myself. But I do remember one time my baby brother, our youngest sibling, he also found some crack vials. He, you know, went in my mom's room because it wasn't like all around the house. It was in her room. And he brought it to me and he was like, what's this? And I like snatched it out of his hand and I was like, you know, give me that. I never answered this question. You know, I just
Mhm.
was like, and then I was devastated, but I was also angry with my mom, like really
Yeah.
angry. I never communicated it to her. But I was angry. It was like, you know, it's bad enough that, you know, one, you're getting high and we all are all experiencing the brunt of it. But
Yeah.
then for our baby brother to come into contact with the paraphernalia, it really was devastating. So from that point, you know, my mom was spending less and less time with us, right?
Yeah.
We ended up moving back to Brooklyn with my grandmother in the housing projects in East New York. And shortly thereafter, you know, within a year or so, I started getting in trouble with the law. I went from being an A student with these aspirations of being a pilot
Mhm.
to hanging out with the wrong crowds, trying to make fast money because the way I rationalized it then is, you know, as a teenager, there's a lot of peer pressure for one, to fit in, to look a certain way, to dress a
Sure.
certain way, and I couldn't get anything, you know, emotionally or otherwise, really, from my mom. She was like in and out. So yeah, I started getting in trouble with the law at an early age, and then, you know, we'll get into it later, but then I can give you a, you know, like a nice
Yeah.
trajectory.
So you start getting in with a crowd. Did you feel like that this crowd was a crowd that you were uncomfortable around, or did you feel like this was an accepting crowd that was kind of dealing with the same things you were dealing with at home and on the streets? And
Yeah.
what was it? Uh, how did you feel when you entered into that world and you kind of went into from being an A student, thinking you were on the right path, to entering into a path that was kind of the unknown path, but it was the
Mhm.
path that was all around you? How did
Yeah.
it feel for you to do that?
Yeah, so it was, to be honest, 100% honest, it was a mixture of both. I felt comfortable around them for the most part because I knew them. Like they
Yeah.
were they were all older than me, some by a year or two, some by a couple more years. But I knew them, like they lived in the building or the building right across from me.
Yeah.
So we felt close, you know, I felt close enough to them. That said, I can honestly say I felt it then, and certainly looking back, I can see it a lot clearer. I felt like I was in some ways an imposter because
Yeah.
I had goals. They didn't. They didn't have the type of goals that I had. Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to be an airline pilot. Right.
Right.
I took flying lessons in high school.
Right.
Literally took flying lessons in high school, Park West High School in Manhattan. And we used to go out to Farmingdale University in Long Island and took flying lessons. Right.
Wow.
The kid from the projects, right?
Wow.
Meanwhile, these guys are just hanging around, you know, the building or whatever, you know. So I didn't look down on them, but I knew that they weren't in school, didn't probably care about school as much as I did. I was a good student,
Mhm.
but I didn't know what else to do, to be honest. I had uncles that sometimes lived in the house with us. There were a lot of us in the house. Because once my mom started abusing drugs, my grandmother, like I said earlier, became the surrogate mother. So she picked up the slack. And it was not just my mother, but it was my cousin's mother, who was also getting high. It was an awful time and we talk about the crack era. It was just awful. A lot of people lost parents and other
Oh yeah.
family members and friends. So yeah, so I felt, like I said, I felt both comfortable to some extent, right? I didn't feel uncomfortable. Um, but I would sometimes when I was with them, I never articulated it then, but I would say to myself, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like what are you doing? You're supposed to be in school right now. You're going to be a pilot. I mean, what about all that? And I think I just got sucked into
To the environment.
the
Yeah.
lifestyle, the environment, the habitual, kind of thinking, and that's how it went.
So as you stepped into this, did you have off and on issues with the law, or was it one big nightmare that happened all at once?
That's a good question. So I had, unfortunately, several brushes with the law. So it seemed like for about 3, 4 years, like every 6 months on average, I would get in trouble, right? Often I would get out within a few days, right? Uh, Once, let me see. Yeah, for the most part, I think once I might have done like a month or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think again, when I look back now, I think it was I wouldn't say it was like a slap on the wrist because every time I got arrested, I thought I was finished. I thought this was
Yeah.
it, right? But in hindsight, I realized that um, it wasn't, I guess, the time, whatever. I just was not ready to stop and get my act together. I don't know how else
Yeah.
to explain it, right? So I don't want to say it was a slap on the wrist because at the time it seemed like more serious than it was. But I had never done state time. I had never
Right.
done like time. The most I had done, I did get in trouble when I was 16. That's why I said from 15 to 16, it was a lot happened. So
Mm-hmm.
I did 4 months on Rikers Island. Now we hear about Rikers Island.
Oh
It's an
yeah.
awful place. People are dying regularly now. Back then it was really bad. It's always been bad. But I don't recall. I was too young, but I don't recall people getting killed. Like now, people get killed on Rikers
Yeah.
Island, and a lot of gangs and stuff. When I was there in '87, I got arrested. I still remember January 12th. 1987, and I got out May 15th, 1987. I still remember, like some things you just don't forget, right?
Yeah.
And so those 4 months were like hell, right? I'm a 16-year-old kid, basically, and there were people my age and a little bit older, and they were, one thing I learned really quickly is that I wasn't as tough as I thought I was, right? Growing
Well, that's
up
a
in
lot to
Eastern,
walk into, a world in Rikers Island at 16 years old. I mean,
it, it was a
that's
lot. It was brutal. I saw a lot of crazy stuff. I mean, like people being violent for like it was a sport. I mean, it
mm-hmm.
really was crazy. So I endured it. I had a couple of fights, got into fights that I didn't, provoke, but I knew how to fight. Growing up,
Mm-hmm.
I knew how to fight. Luckily, I didn't get jumped. All right, some people got beat up. They just got beat up like that, got jumped. That never happened for whatever reason. But I had a couple of fights over the course of 4 months. Got out in May. While on Rikers Island, earned my GED the first time I took it. Then got out, worked a little bit, and then went to college the next year. Uh, but I said to say, so that's the most time I'd ever done prior to doing this long stint. It was the
Mm-hmm.
4 months when I was 16. 16, then I turned 17.
So when you went to college, Joe, were you out of the neighborhood and out of New York, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I went to a school upstate New York.
Okay.
So it's about 5 hours from the city, and it was in Utica, New York. So it's like in the center, actually, the center of the
Yeah.
state, right? And I went there. I mean, I look now, everything happens for a reason. But anyway, my goal, right, was to go to a school in Daytona Beach, Florida, right? It's
That
called,
sounds good.
yeah, right, right. And they had a flight program.
Yeah.
It's Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, right? They
Yeah.
have one in Daytona Beach, Florida, and another one they had, I don't know if they still do, but it was in Prescott, Arizona. I still remember
Mhm.
this because this was my dream. I'm telling
Yeah. I
you, this was my
researched it
dream.
all out. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the issue, so to speak, was that I didn't know anything about college. My mom only went to the 10th grade. My dad was in and out of my life. He had gone to college. I wanted to be a pilot because my
Mhm.
dad was a pilot, right? Not at the time, but he had been in the
And
military.
I meant to ask you, Joe, did you have like any relationship with your dad up until this time? I mean, were you in and out of a relationship with him, or was it just
Yeah,
totally he was off on another world with
it
his own
was
life?
more of the latter, more of the
Okay.
latter. But he was in and out. Sometimes when we were much younger, like preteens, this is no exaggeration. I remember once we were living in a different part of East New York, Brooklyn, and my brother and I were walking near, I think it might have been like Easter Sunday or something like that, I'm not sure, but we were walking
Mhm.
on it was a church, or they was having a church service on a street called Pennsylvania Avenue, Pennsylvania New Lots. And we, as we were coming out, this is crazy, as we were coming out of service, we spotted our dad's van. He had a Volkswagen. Yeah, it's like we hadn't seen him in years. And we was like, that looks like, because he had it, the way he dressed it up and all that.
Yeah.
Like, that looks like that. And we stood there. We literally stood there. It wasn't long, and I guess he had. It might have been like a supermarket or something that he was parked in front of. We stood out, and sure enough, it was Dad. Comes
Wow.
out. I mean, it was that type of thing. It was crazy. It was crazy. Then, as we got older, we were able to stay in touch a little more. But he was mostly doing him. He had several kids all over the place. Literally, I
Mhm.
have siblings now who I don't know, um, and probably will never know because I'm not
Mm.
trying to search for them.
Yeah.
But so that was my life, and so I went from doing the like having no guidance in terms of school. I couldn't. One, my mom was getting high, so she was less and less around. So
Mhm.
it wasn't like I could
Kind of
go to
on your
her and
own.
say, "Mom, how could you help me out with these forms, the FAFSA
Yeah.
forms, or this stuff?" And I felt like I was on my own, and I didn't know anything about scholarships and grants. I mean, it was just like I didn't know anything. But I mean, I
Yeah.
could read
A
and
lot of
all
people
that.
don't. Most
Yeah, a lot
people
of
don't.
people. Exactly. So I say that to say, so what I did find out though about Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University is that I couldn't afford it. Right, I
Yeah.
just couldn't afford it. It was a private school, and so there's the tuition part, there's the room and board, but then there's the flight lessons. Flight lessons are very expensive,
Mhm.
right? And so I just couldn't afford it, and my hopes were kind of dashed, right? Because I didn't know who to turn to
Yeah.
figure this stuff out. So a friend of mine at the time, well, was also going. He was a year older than me. He was also going to college, and so together we looked at SUNY School, State University of New York, and he stumbled upon the school we ended up going to, which they didn't have a flight program, but they had what they call A&P program, airframe and power plant.
Okay.
So I said, okay, that's close enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To what? So we went up there in January of 1989 is when I started college.
How'd that go for you? I mean, was that an escape to get out? And were you
Yeah,
a college kid, or were you still drawn back to the streets?
yes, this is a good question because I was not drawn to the streets, but I was not prepared for college
Yeah.
emotionally,
Yeah.
developmentally, as far as maturity. I realize that now because I
Yeah.
got caught up in partying,
Yeah.
right?
A
Within
lot of kids
weeks.
do.
Yeah, a lot of us did. So they had the keg parties and
Yeah.
all of that. I was like, oh, this is great. And I had the
It's awesome.
freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had that experience. We were on campus the first semester, then off campus the second semester. And I lost my way. I lost my way. For me, even like looking at my own life, that's the tragedy of it all because I knew, uh, unlike some people for various reasons who didn't know that they had gifts or talents like I felt that I did because my
Yep.
mom told me so. And
Yeah.
so,
You had
uh,
goals.
yeah, I had goals, but then I didn't have the mentors or coaches or counselors and things
Yeah.
like that to keep me on track. So I just, slipped through the cracks basically.
So what happened? Did you stay there for a little while and then did you drop out and go back to New York and the boroughs?
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like you read my memoir because because so what I did the first semester, like I said, January to May of 1989, I was in school. I attended classes, but I partied a lot, and so I started slipping, so to speak. And then I went home that summer for the summer break and got my girlfriend pregnant, meaning that wasn't the plan, but hadn't seen her right
Hmm.
throughout the semester. And so when we did see each other, she got pregnant, right? So I went back to school in the fall, right, late August. And, I'm thinking, I'll go to school. And then, I mean, I really didn't have a plan when I think
Yeah.
about it now, but, I'll go to school, then I'll come back, I'll get a job, we'll take care of our child, right? Mind you, I'm 19 going on 20 at the
Yeah.
time,
That's
right?
young.
And yes, yes. And so while in school, I think I stayed maybe 2 months. I could not concentrate. All I kept thinking about is I got a child on the way.
Yeah.
I don't
Big.
want to be a deadbeat dad like my father.
Yeah.
That's what was, I was
That
like,
weight on your mind. Yeah.
yeah. And so I ended up leaving school, and that was hard. Like, because like I said, I had dreams. It wasn't like, oh, well, I'll just leave school. It's like, oh my God, like, where's my life going to,
Yeah.
where's it
Yeah.
going to
What's
go from
next?
here? Yeah,
Yeah.
what's next? I mean, you leave school and, but I did that. I left. My girlfriend at the time was staying with her mom in Harlem. They moved from Brooklyn to Harlem. So my family had moved down to North Carolina, right, to Greensboro, North Carolina. And so I didn't have family for the most part in New York
Hmm.
City. So I stayed with my girlfriend and her mom at the time. And so I left school, like I said, begrudgingly. And then so I worked a little bit, not much, because back then minimum wage was like, I don't know, $3, $4 or
Yeah.
something
Not
like that an
much.
hour. Yeah,
Yeah.
not much. I was like, okay, this is not going to work. I don't. So and I can honestly say this, I'm not proud of this, but during a couple of weeks, I was desperate and I was thinking about committing crimes. I'm like,
Hmm.
because I'm like, working is not getting it. I don't have a college degree, right? Uh, and so I ended up, make a long story short, I ended up getting hooked up with some guys who I met in college, ironically. I stayed in touch with them and they were like, hey, we can make some fast money. We're doing some things up here. And I was like, really? So I was intrigued. I was desperate. I
Hmm.
was desperate. And so I took them up on their offer. And I had, again, I'm not proud of this, but ironically enough, I had bought some crack, right? Because that's what was moving like
Yep.
that, right? As opposed to marijuana or the other stuff, right?
Hmm.
And so I took some vows upstate, and within like an hour or two, it was all gone. I sold it all, and I was like, I'm hooked. I mean,
Hmm.
seriously, I was like, I'm hooked. So I had to wait till the other guys, they had a lot more stuff than me, a lot more work or product. And so once their stuff ran out, we all went to the city, and then it didn't stop. And I was a good salesman, good communicator, good
Yep.
with people in general. So, and then I got addicted to the lifestyle, the fast
Hmm.
money, the fast woman, the fast
Hmm.
everything fast,
Yeah.
right?
It's a whole
Uh,
different life.
it's a life. It's a hell of a
Yeah.
life. Yeah. So that was my story. Yeah. So I did that for some years until I got in trouble with this other serious crime.
Well, let's talk about that because I mean, you go through that time period, and let's talk about when the serious stuff happened and you went through your nightmare.
Yeah. So from 89 to 91 is when I was making the fast money. I'll just say that, living that lifestyle.
Hmm.
We did move down to North Carolina in 1990. Like there were always these, this yearning to live a normal life. Even
Yeah.
while I was making the fast money, there was always the yearning. So it was because I had these bigger dreams and visions for myself.
Yep.
It wasn't like this is it. I've made it. I've arrived.
It's a
It
transition.
was, yeah, it was just like in some ways, like, man, who are you, man? Like, I
Yeah.
mean,
What's
really,
going
like,
on?
ask me, yeah, like, what's going on here? And so, to speed it up, so in 1991, I was 21 years old, and I'll just get to the gist of it. Is that ended up getting into an altercation, a physical altercation, with a guy who was from upstate New York, from that area,
Hmm.
who some months prior, this happened in October, early October of 1991, the crime, right? My crime. But in some months earlier, someone who happened to, someone who happened to be from New York City, like me, tried to rob the guy who I ended up having an altercation with. I had absolutely nothing to do with it, right? What we had in common is that we both were from New York City, and
Right.
so the guy thought that, well, he said to me, he actually said to me, because the guy tried to rob him. The guy tried to rob him. I happened to be in the bar. It was a bar at the same time with this guy, and I was talking to the guy, right? And so the guy at some point tries to rob this other guy, and I'm like, this is crazy. But in my mind, I'm saying, well, my conscience is clear. I had nothing to do with it. Absolutely
Right.
nothing to do with it. But I saw the guy who was gonna be robbed. He never robbed him, but the guy who was gonna be robbed. I saw him maybe a month or two later, and he approached me, like, in a violent
Came at
manner.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was like, "Hey, I know you had something to do with this," and blah blah blah. And I'm like, "No, absolutely not." He was like, "No, all you guys from the city, all together, blah blah blah." So and I said, "That's not true, because it's not. Some of us can't stand each other in the
Yeah.
city. Like, we really don't. Yeah, we really don't like each other. It just seems like that, right?" And so, but he didn't believe me, and so he threatened. He said basically, like, the next time I see you, I'm going to get you, or like that. And I know what that meant. Like, because
Mm-hmm.
we're talking, that lifestyle is very dangerous,
Yeah.
obviously, right? And so I, said, listen, I had nothing to do with it. I swear. I'm like, I'm not saying it because I'm afraid. I'm telling you that's the truth. I had nothing to do with this guy trying to rob me. But he would have nothing, he didn't want to hear it. And then so months later, on October 1st, I happened to go to another bar, to actually to meet someone, to meet a young lady,
Mm-hmm.
and who I had heard was going to be there, and we, I'd seen her around and stuff, and so I went there to see her. And then as soon as I'm not going to get into all the gritty details, but as soon as I walked in, I see the guy, right, who said, the next time I see you, I'm going to get you because I know you had something to do with this. So I walks in, he was playing darts, right? It's a very small, narrow bar. He approached me. He was larger than me. I think he was maybe 6 months older than me, so he wasn't much older. But
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a beer hug. And like I couldn't make out everything he was saying, but he was like, do we have beef or something like that? And then he had a gun on him. He had a weapon on him, and I disarmed him because I panicked. Right? I'm like, this guy, because he was a street guy. He was a
Yeah.
street guy. Yeah, he was a street guy. And I know how the lifestyle works, so to speak. And so I disarmed him and used it on him, like reflexively, threw the gun on the floor. I mean, because I didn't, that wasn't my intentions to do
Yeah. It was
anything,
just
to come in.
a bar fight that gets out of control.
Yeah, and then I
Yeah.
rushed out, and so they got the weapon, this and that. They got witnesses. Obviously, I didn't plan this stuff. I came to have
Yeah.
a good time, to hook up with this lady, this young
Mm-hmm.
lady. That was my plan. So yeah, and then I was on the run for several months. So I ran. I couldn't see myself turning myself in.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't grow up like that. And so I was on the run for about 5.5 months. That was awful, awful,
I
awful.
bet that's got to be
Yeah.
tough. I've interviewed people that have been on the run, and it's you get tired.
Yeah, I get tired. It was exhausting. It was no joke. Every time a cop car went by, I'm like, oh my God, they got me.
Yeah, they're
They're
getting
on
me.
me.
Yeah.
It was awful. It was exhausting.
So Joe, then what happens?
So I, like I said, was on the run for, like I said, 5.5 months, and then I got arrested in Brooklyn, in a different section of Brooklyn, for, and I'm ashamed to say this, but I was I didn't realize, but lack of sleep. I hadn't slept for days,
Mm-hmm.
and I was drinking malt liquor. I don't drink malt liquor now, but back then I did. Right, so drinking malt liquor, sleep deprived, and then I remember my son's mother, because by then we had our son. He was going on 2 years old.
Mm-hmm.
She she was saying, "Oh, you need to get some rest." So I took some NyQuil, right, to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Not realize I didn't know this because I wasn't I didn't take NyQuil, but
Yeah.
I knew I needed some rest, so I took some NyQuil. But I had already been drinking the malt liquor, and that combination just
Didn't
made me
blend well
kind of like
together.
delirious or something. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, some stuff to this day I can't even remember. But what I do remember is being in a different section of Brooklyn, right? Like the next day or something. I mean, it's just really crazy. I can't even remember everything. And getting into an altercation with some guys at a bodega, right?
Yeah.
And they were chasing me. I mean, it's crazy. They were
Sounds like
chasing
a
me.
dream.
Yeah, it was like a dream. Seriously, a dream, nightmare, whatever, right?
Yeah.
But chasing me, I ran to the bus stop, right? Because they were like really trying to put the beats on me, as we used to say, right? And then when someone had called the police, so the police came to the scene. I don't know how much of an altercation, but I resisted arrest or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing you know, I blacked out because they hit me upside the head. Because luckily they didn't kill me. It's a true story. Right. And I ended up in the hospital on a gurney, handcuffed to a gurney, and say, "Hey, you're wanted for this crime upstate." It's
Wow.
crazy.
What a way to wake up.
What a way to wake up. And I'm like, holy, crap.
So how long does that process last for you, Joe, with getting, the handcuffs on the gurney to standing in front of a judge saying, "Hey, you're going away"?
Yeah. So, this was about a year.
About a year?
Yeah, because I was about a year. Because this was March of '92 is when I got arrested. The crime happened in October of '91.
Yeah.
So March of '92, I got arrested. And then I was sentenced. So I went to trial. I think it was February of 1993. So roughly a year. Then I got sentenced maybe that April. So it's pretty fast if you think about it. A year is not a long time. And that was, as you can imagine, surreal. I was sentenced.
What was your sentence?
Yeah,
What did they have to?
Yeah, so I was sentenced to 25 years of life.
That is a
The
long
max. They gave
time.
me a plea. Yeah, that's a long time. I was 22, going on 23. So I was like, I hadn't lived 25 years.
Right.
So I couldn't even fathom what that was like. I felt somewhat like I was going to faint, but then I felt like I had to just it just was weird. It was weird. They did offer a plea. They started with 20 to life. I was like, nah, I can't take that. I said, you give me 8 years, I'll do 8 years. I mean, and I would say to this day, I feel remorseful, for having him. I feel very remorseful. And it also informs what I do now, because I feel like I'm living for both myself and for the person whose life I ended up taking. And even if, we both weren't thinking right, both like, if you want to say knuckleheads, nobody deserves to lose their life, right? So I just want to say that, put that on the record.
Yeah.
But yeah, so so it was about a year. And then I went up to, as we say, the big house. Went up to, we had people serving 50 years, 100 years. It's like serious, big time, So
what, as a kid, you're not that old. How old are you when you're walking into that new world, unknown world?
22. I was 22. I was
22 years old.
That's pretty much a kid the way I look at it now.
Well, it is. You're a kid. I mean, it's a kid that's getting out of college, and you're going into a whole unknown world. What's going through your mind thinking, man, I'm just thinking, Joe, I mean, looking at the time, you're not going to be there for a week, a month, a year.
Right.
What are you thinking walking into that world?
Yeah. So all sorts of thoughts. Just thinking back it's really something. So one, I thought my life was over, right?
Yeah.
I said, I'm finished. I am finished. And so that was like one of the most prevalent thoughts. Also, I was thinking, like, how am I going to survive this? Like, how do you do it? Like, how do you do time? Like that type of time.
That much time. Yeah.
Yeah, like how do you do it? I mean, they're talking a year or two or something like that, and you're like, okay, a month at a time or whatever. It's like, how do you do 25 years? Like,
Yeah.
what, with the possibility of not being released, I
Right.
mean, that's, yeah. So, um, yeah, so it was scary. It was scary as hell. I had heard all the, stories about prison and what happens in prisons and all of that. And so I always had my guards up, right?
Yeah.
Um, and was, to be honest, was like kind of, I mean, I was not a troublemaker at all, but always prepared to defend myself if I had to. I never had to. And I mean physically, like, I
Hmm.
never had to. And I'm, pretty smart. So I did have, I would say this, I did have a couple of, well, in the first prison that I was in, you know, uh, people like proposition me, and I'm like, I'm not with it, buddy. Like, and I had to put my game face on, like, I'm not with it, right?
Yeah.
We'll go somewhere else or whatever, right? And so that was that. But what it did though also is that, meaning that time was, and thinking about the time and experiencing the time was made me more determined to get out. So
Mm.
I stayed in the law library. So I had a program assignment. Like, you got to be busy. You can't just like just
Hmm.
stay in the cell, right? So after my program assignment, almost every day, just about 7 days a week, I was in the law library trying to find out that key, as they say, to
Hmm.
help
The
me
magic
get
key.
that
Yeah.
magic key to help me get out. And that's what I did for a large part of my time in prison, to be honest.
So that
So
was really
yeah,
like your escape. You educated yourself through the law all the
yes,
time.
all the time. So much so that the COs, the correctional officers, which can be, some of them could be really mean.
Hmm.
I guess and I mean this, they must have saw something in me, because I remember one CO calling me to his desk in the law library, and he said, something like, "I notice you're here every day, blah blah blah. You come often. You can fill out this form, and I can have it so that you don't have to like fill it out regularly. It'll be like a standing call
Hmm.
out. That's what they used to call it. Like, so yeah, I'm always on the list." So I mean, that was nice. You don't get a lot of nice gestures from
Yeah.
COs,
No.
right? So he saw something in me, and he was like, "This kid doesn't belong here," right? And he's trying to get out, and so yeah, so I took advantage of that. I worked out to keep my sanity going. I mind my business, was very vigilant in terms of who I was around and things like that, kept it very small. And then as time went by, I evolved into my own self, became a leader, teaching classes on personal finance, entrepreneurship. That came later, but
Well,
not much later.
let's talk about that though, Joe, because prison is a strange, primitive environment, but
It is.
you can earn respect in that world
Mm-hmm.
if you're able to help people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I was interviewing Josh Boyer the other day, and his story was one where he was in the law library all the time. He became so good at it,
Mm-hmm.
and so knowledgeable that he was helping write petitions and motions
Yeah.
and really
Mm-hmm.
actually helping people. And that actually helped him
Mm-hmm.
eventually earn his own clemency for what he was doing. But
Mm-hmm.
I thought it's interesting that you took and I guess some of that would be like your own escape, helping
Mm-hmm.
people, teaching classes. Can you
Mm-hmm.
kind of let us know a little bit about that, how you got into that in that world?
In that world, yeah, yeah. So I think it all started when I go back when I used to babysit, all right, before
Yeah.
my mom's addiction, right? I used to babysit because I got I'm
Yeah.
the oldest, and so I used to play teacher with my siblings. I
Sure.
don't know where that came from, but yeah, I think part of it is because I was a good student and I wanted them to excel as well. I mean,
Yeah.
really, it was really that simple. And I would literally have my other four siblings look over their schoolwork, to give them assignments, play teacher, right?
Yeah. It's in your
So
DNA.
yeah, it's in my DNA. So I didn't realize it at the time, though. I just wanted for them what I received, like the adulation and stuff like that
Hmm.
from my mom, right? So fast forward to 1994, I was in Elmira Correctional Facilities, about 5 hours from New York City, and had a lot of time to reflect and think about my life. Went through bouts of depression. I didn't call it that at the time. I didn't know what to call it, but I was, very down and all
Well, how
that.
did you handle, like, I mean, there's hard days in prison. What were your
Yes.
ways of getting out of that?
Sometimes, to be honest, sometimes I didn't know how to get out of it. You just
Yeah.
sit in it, right? Because you
Yeah.
didn't know what to do. You felt powerless. I felt powerless some days. I remember some guys that were either on one side or another, that they were older, and some of them had done time before, so they were more seasoned. And here I
Yeah.
am. I'm like, man, I just couldn't fathom what,
Felt trapped. Yeah.
like, how I'm gonna, yeah, I felt trapped. How am I gonna get through this? And they were like, hey man, pick your head up, man. How you doing, man? And you'll
Yeah.
be okay, man. They sensed it, right?
Encouraged you out of it.
Yeah, they encouraged me, so I really appreciated that. But then there were other days when, like I said, like you said, the law library was an escape, and the
Hmm.
general library. And it was in the general library where I would go and I would find books on personal finance and entrepreneurship. I got to that point because, again, I had a lot of time to think, do a lot of introspection. And what I came away with is that just about every time I got arrested, right, even for the little, I don't want to say small or petty, but when I
Hmm.
didn't do much time, it was always about money or material things. Like that's
Yep.
what one of the things they had in common,
Hmm.
right? And so I said, I need to understand money
Hmm.
in a legal way, right?
Yeah.
I need to know another way. I mean, I hadn't had jobs before, so it's not like I hadn't had jobs, but nothing, I was a kid, so I did nothing big, nothing. Um, but I was like, I need to get this. And so I went to the general library, we started reading up on stuff, and I took to it naturally. I was like, I get this.
Hmm.
It just really drew me in, investing in stocks and bonds, and mutual
Made
funds,
sense to you.
business. It just made sense. And it was in some ways empowering, right? I
Sure.
felt empowered, but it also made me uh, kind of angry, and that I didn't know it earlier. I felt like I
Yeah.
should have known it or whatever, and that my life could have gone in a very different way if I had known
Sure.
this stuff. And so I felt, to use your word, trapped, because I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm learning and stuff, but now I can't go anywhere. I
I
can't
can't go
do much
anywhere.
with it.
Right.
Right. I can't do anything with it. I mean, that's how it kind of felt.
Yeah.
So, but this was in 94. So then I was transferred to another facility, Green Haven Correction Facility, uh, in also upstate New York, but closer to the city. And within a couple of months of being there, I started teaching classes. Someone overheard me talking about investing, and they said, "Oh, I'm the president of this quote unquote inmate organization, and I'd like to offer you to teach my members." And I
Hmm.
was like, "Oh, I don't know." I was a little intimidated, to be honest. I'm
Sure.
25 years old. This guy had to be maybe 35 or something like that, who was
Hmm.
telling me this, and I imagined that his members were also about 10, 15 years older than me. So I was like, I don't know if I could do it, but I'll give it a try. He's like, no, you got it. You got it. So I put together a little curriculum, like an agenda,
Yeah.
taught my first class in 1995. Mind you, I'm only 25 years old, had only been in prison 3 years, but
Hmm.
I knew my stuff. I did know my
Yeah.
stuff. Right? And I taught my first class, and it was like a high. I'm being honest. Like I
Yeah.
was like, this is it. The responses I got, the fact that I was doing good, I was making a
Yeah.
positive difference in someone else's life made. So I never turned back. From there, I became known. I'm known now, like throughout New York State. Right,
Hmm.
the prison system. Just the other day, someone was like, "You're Joe Robinson. I read your book," and
Yeah.
stuff like that. When I go to certain functions, and I'm like, I'm
That's
always
got to
humble.
fill you up, man.
Yeah, yeah, no, it does, and it just says you got to keep doing it. You got to keep impacting people's lives like this. So that's how it kind of went for me. Then I taught other people how to teach, the classes, and yeah, I've done a lot of stuff,
So how many years how many years were you actually in, Joe, while you were doing this?
Yeah, so I was in a total of, my sentence was 25 to life. I did 24 and a half
Wow.
years. I did
Wow.
just about all. The last 6 months, I got a 6-month credit. It's like, I mean, it made a difference, but it was like, come
Yeah.
on, man, you could have gave, more credit than that. Yeah, so
So
I did
what,
24 and a half.
I mean, 24 years, I mean, I mean, just thinking about what all happened in 24 years,
Mm-hmm.
so many things happened, and
Yep,
the
yep,
whole world changed technology
yep.
wise. And
Yes.
what, when you were getting close to the door, what, what were you thinking? Were you thinking, I'm Joe Robinson now, I could go do this on the outside? Or
Mhm.
like, what was going through your mind of how you were going to get into the outside world?
Yeah. So, all right, good question. So I knew, uh, I'm trying to think how far back, but I knew more than a decade ago, more than a decade and a half ago, meaning from now, right? I
Yeah.
knew, let's say 15 or more years ago, that I would be an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
Legally, legally,
Right.
not the
Right.
street,
Good
right?
point.
I was an entrepreneur before too,
Yeah. Good
but I went
point.
about it the wrong way, right?
Yeah.
But that I would be, and I had different ideas. When I go back to the 90s, that was, the thing at the time, or at least the books I was reading was talking about having a mail order business. I was like,
Hmm.
oh, I'll have a mail order business and I'll sell these products to people in prison and all that. That was a big thing back then.
Sure.
And this is all pre-internet, right?
Yeah.
And then, then it went from one thing to another. And then I stumbled, did I stumble? I think, yeah. Well, my wife got me a subscription. I met my wife while I was inside. Let me just say that.
That's
We're married.
interesting.
We've been married almost
Uh,
19 years. Next
love
month,
that.
19 years. Yeah. And
So
so
that can, and that also helped you keep connected to the outside world, which is
that
huge.
my wife is amazing. And she has made a huge difference in my life. Huge difference. She's 20 years my senior,
Yeah.
right? She's we talk about that, but anyway, and I say that to say, so she's very wise. She's
Hmm.
world traveled, worked at the New York Times for 31 years, very
Wow.
accomplished and all that. She's retired
Very
now.
cool.
Yeah. So we met through correspondence, and then the friendship turned into a marriage. And now, 2 decades later, we're still, rocking and
That's
rolling,
awesome.
as they say. And so, yeah, so tremendous. That's how I was able to publish the first version of my book. I was still inside. I didn't get out to 2016. The book was
Yeah.
published in 2007.
Wow.
So we did a whole bunch of stuff. But I so started, like I said, reading these books and sharing my knowledge with others. And it literally changed my identity, how I saw myself.
Sure.
I was not regular just Joe from East New York, Brooklyn
Yeah.
anymore. I was Joe the entrepreneur. I was Joe
Yeah.
the
You had a
investor,
passion
Joe
and
the
a
teacher.
purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a passion, and that's who I am. That's So it was more of that. People came to seek, information from me.
Yeah.
Whether I'm talking about the regular guys, and I mean regular, and then the tough guys. You got the
Hmm.
gangsters in there too, right?
Sure.
So even those guys
They
would
want to
come to
know.
me and say, "Hey, I got some money on the side, man. I'm trying to do
Yeah.
the right thing, man. Give me some tips." What I mean, they wouldn't say it like
Exactly.
that, and I'd be like, "Yeah, we'll get together. We'll meet in the yard. We'll talk about it or whatever." And so from talking about it, this is prior to my writing the book. I started, the light bulb went off. I'm like, I'm like giving away all this free information, right, to everyone. I need to package
Yeah. I got to
it in a
monetize
book,
this.
right? I need to monetize this. And so I told my wife about it, and she was like, "It's a great idea." She was like, "I don't know anything about business. Just tell me what to do,
Yeah.
and we'll make it happen." And that's what we did. So yeah,
So
it's
that's
really
cool. So when you got out, you actually, I mean, you had that going in your mind. That's who you were as
yes.
a person. You just were jumping over on the other side now, but it's been 24 years. What was that transition like, leaving prison after 24
Mhm.
years and going into the free world?
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
and it sounds like you being married, that obviously helps
yeah.
because
Huge
you
impact.
were already plugged into a
Hmm.
world that you could come to. But
Hmm.
what was that like, Joe? I mean, a lot of people don't know people that have been in for 24 years and then go
Yeah,
out.
right. So one, it was how can I think? It was obviously it was exciting. There was some I wouldn't yeah, there was some fear, right? There's
Yeah.
some fear because you just don't know.
Obviously.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
don't know what's on the other side. I don't care who's in your corner. Yeah, you
Yeah.
just don't know. And then for me, I realized now there was a lot of self-imposed pressure,
Sure.
right? Because it was, again, I was no longer just Joe from the neighborhood. In my
Yep.
mind, I was Joe who had accomplished A, B, and C, these things.
Hmm.
And
You become a
so
name where you were in
a
prison.
name, a
Yeah.
brand. Yeah. And
Mhm.
so initially, so I, prior to Mindful Money, LLC, I started another company, Life Navigation Systems, LLC, but I didn't do anything with it. So I wanted to focus on personal development and all that, because that's what
Sure.
I'm, very fond of and have grown a lot from. And so I started that business, but I had a job. I was lucky. I had a job waiting for me. So that's also non-traditional. So I had a job, making 50K as soon as I came out, like as
That's
soon as I came
huge.
out, right? And so I had the stability of, wife and a household, the job. And although had these ideas for business, I didn't stick through it.
Mhm.
And so I ended up going to school instead.
Okay.
Then doing school and work. Make a long story short, so now I'm at the point that the last 18 months or so I've been really focusing on mindful money and taking it to the next level. And so
Well, let's
that's
talk about mindful money, because
yeah,
what all do you do
yeah,
now, Joe? Because it sounds incredible.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
who do you get in front of? How do
mhm,
you get in front of people? How do they find you?
yeah.
What's going on with mindful money?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. So Mindful Money One, I have my book, right? I think
Right
as I said,
there.
it's the revised edition. So there's that, and it's in print and an ebook format. I do speaking engagements. I did one last Saturday for reentry organizations. New York City, one good thing about it is that it has several large and small reentry organizations. So there are resources to help people as they
Yeah.
come home. And since my target audience is primarily people impacted by the criminal legal system, I have an automatic community. Like I
Sure. You
know
got
a
people
lot,
to talk to. Yeah.
yeah, I have people to talk to. So a lot of these organizations, they are people like me who turned their lives around, and they are now in leadership positions in these organizations. Many of them, because I've done so much time and did the time the way I did it, or had
Hmm.
time served me, as I like to say.
Yeah.
Uh, these are my buddies. Like I can call them up and say, "Hey, I'm going to do a presentation. You got any opportunities?" Blah, blah. So that's what I did this past Saturday. A paid speaking engagement. I have
And I
one
got to tell
this.
you that what you just said there is such a big deal, Joe, because one of the things I find that I really wouldn't have known except going through this experience
Mhm,
and getting to interview people like you all the
mhm,
time. There is a community out there, and there
mhm.
are some great second chance people who
Yep.
have made a way, and then
Mhm.
connecting with those people. Those people want to help. Those
Yep.
people who have, a step or two above, you can
Mhm.
reach out to them, and they will actually say, "Hey, yeah, Joe, I'm
Right.
right with you, man. I want to see you do well." And that's something you've got to just humble yourself and ask for help, because
Yep.
those people will help.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. That's what I've been doing. A friend of mine, like I said, for this organization, I presented for last week, and I'll present in 2 days, and then at the end of this month, so I have a three speaking engagements. He was like, "Man, we're waiting for you, man. Like, what
Yeah.
do we haven't heard from you in a while. I got the money for you, like, like." So I was like, "Okay, all right, we'll do it." So I put together, a flyer, the program, and it
Yeah.
went off very well. I'm looking forward to this Saturday, and Brent, like I said, I really love teaching this stuff to especially to
I can see it in your eyes when you talk about
yeah,
it. I mean,
yeah, I
and
love
that's
it.
what's so awesome about your story. Joe, you could have curled up in a ball
Mm-hmm,
and in a fetal position and gave
mm-hmm.
up
Yeah,
with that
yeah,
type of situation, that type of
mm-hmm,
time.
mm-hmm,
And it always just like inspires me as I sit here
mm-hmm.
and listen to these
Yeah,
stories like yours. You didn't
mm-hmm.
do it.
Right,
You didn't do it. You
right,
went to the law library, you went to the library, you found a
mm-hmm,
passion that you said,
mm-hmm.
"Man, I like doing this. This is what I used to do when I was a babysitter
Yeah,
with my own
mm-hmm.
siblings."
Right,
And then what you found is it made you feel different.
yes,
And what you're doing now, it's incredible how many
mm-hmm,
people you can affect
mm-hmm,
and impact, because you are who you are. You've
right,
actually been and walked the walk
mm-hmm.
and done the time and actually come out on the other side, and you're surviving, and you're
Yeah,
surviving in your own passion, which
mm-hmm,
is so cool. It's
mm-hmm.
so cool for somebody to be
Right,
able
and
to
I
do that.
appreciate that. Yeah, no, I care. I care about this stuff. I don't want people to have to, especially young people, to have to go through half the crap that I went through.
Yeah.
And I think that financial literacy is one among several tools. I see it as a tool, right? To get people to shift their mindsets in relationship to money and not serve money, but have money serve them.
Mm,
We got it all wrong.
mm.
And that's my thing. And so, so
Well,
this
and
is what
without
I'll do
knowing
for
that,
the rest of
Joe,
my life. Yeah.
yeah, without knowing that, people will turn towards desperation. Like, you even said earlier in the interview,
Yeah.
you had goals, you had things that were going on, but you
Mm-hmm.
got into a desperate situation and thought, I'm going to turn to something I don't want to turn to,
Mm-hmm.
but you were desperate. And if you would have known what you know now, you probably would have taken the fork the
Right.
other way in the road
Right. Right.
and
No,
started
exactly.
something else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You always
Exactly.
had your brain.
I always have my brain. And yeah, no, exactly. And that's what I tell people now. I said, you have your brain, hopefully good health. That's
Yeah.
number one. But
Yeah.
your brain and time. Those
Brain
are
and
the
time.
assets we have, right? Now we can have an influence on our brain. The time is different, right? You got to really, that's something I still struggle with, right? To be honest, on a kind of serious note, is that one of the things because you had asked Brent earlier, what was the transition like? So while I had a home, nice home in the West Village, it's a
Yeah.
nice neighborhood in New York City, while I had a lovely wife, I had a job, I had friends, stuff like that, there still was what I call an internal reentry process,
Absolutely.
right? So, you connected to jobs and services and all that, but there's a lot that you're processing, turning around. That was no joke. That was pretty difficult.
And I think that's something that, and the more we talk about that, I think the more people can feel free talking about it, because
Mm-hmm.
I know when I came home to an unbelievable wife. She was a warrior through the whole process that I
Mm-hmm.
went through. 3 daughters, and she was the role model for them on how to handle a
Mm-hmm.
situation that was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think back, when I was going and when I got out, everybody's so happy for you and they're looking at you like, "Oh, Brent, aren't you so happy?" I am
Mm-hmm.
so happy, but my
Mm-hmm.
mind is racing because
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
wanting to do so many things, and I'm also still wanting to be me.
Right.
And I have people looking at, has he changed? Is he different?
Right.
What's
Mm-hmm.
he like?
Mm-hmm.
And all those things are going through your head. And it
Mm-hmm.
takes a while just internally for you to begin to feel more like yourself.
Yep.
And, you and I have been out the same amount of time.
Yep.
I was sentenced to 5 years. You were sentenced to 25
Right.
years.
Right.
Totally different.
Right. But it's still
But
time. Yeah.
your reentry into that world is one that I think a lot of people who serve time almost shame themselves to not want to talk about how hard
Mm-hmm.
the reentry is in their own mind, because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's thinking
Mm-hmm.
you're out, you're done.
Right. Yeah.
You
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 must be happy. Everything
you
is
got to
good
be
now.
happy, and you are. But there's
Right.
so many other things you're dealing with that you
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
get your mind wrapped around so you
Yeah.
can still, get back to you.
Exactly. And let me say this something on that, Brent, just very briefly. Two of the main things that was most difficult for me, right? Because it was difficult. One was the feeling, the palpable and strong feeling of sense of loss.
Yeah.
It's 25 years.
Lost time.
That's half my life. It was half my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
I'm gone. Like, it wasn't wasted. That's the good thing.
Wasn't wasted.
I was determined not to waste it. But, I would be sitting at the table. We'd be having breakfast, my wife and I, breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever. And I would have moments and I'm like, man, this is hard. And she's like, it's
Yeah.
hard. What do you mean? And then sometimes I couldn't even articulate it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm a communicator, but I was
Right.
like, I didn't have the words. And then at one point, one day I finally was able to reflect on it, woke up in the morning and jotted down some stuff and wrote an article about it. Right.
Mm.
But it was incredibly hard. Like, I was like, damn, I'm 40, because I came home, I was 46. I'm like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
46. Like, I'm 46. I had to keep saying,
OG
like, you're
now.
46. Like, yeah, I'm an OG for real. But it's like, yeah, I'm like, I was 21 when I went in, and I turned 22 like the next month.
You grew up in prison.
Yeah. And I grew up in prison. And guess what? I watched my son grow up in pictures in prison.
Oh, man.
That
What's
was
and do you have is there a connection relationship with that son who must be how old
he's
now?
33 now. We are not on the best of terms, unfortunately. We were
Yeah.
until maybe 5, 6 months, something like that
But
months
that's
ago.
tough. I mean,
It was
because
tough.
you can't do what you want to do
Hmm.
as a parent
Yeah.
because you're captured by the system inside,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
there's just a certain amount of frustration that rolls with that
Hmm.
and it's hard. I mean,
No, it's
it
hard.
was hard for me, and I can't imagine for you
Hmm.
that amount of time to try to stay connected and have
Yeah.
real connections. It's a
No, it was
task.
incredibly hard. It was
Yeah,
incredibly hard. Another thing I'll just say that was very challenging was the technology.
I can't
Learning
imagine.
technology. They didn't have the internet when I came back when
No,
I went in. So I was like, I knew about it. Obviously, I read books
yeah, you see it
about
on
it.
TV.
Yeah, you see it on TV and all that.
Yeah,
And then I come home, I'm like, oh, passwords and this, I forgot. Oh my God. And I literally felt incompetent sometimes.
yeah,
I
yeah,
was like, what the hell? Now, it's different. I'm like getting the hang of it slowly, but
yeah.
surely.
Well, you're like that. You take
Yeah.
something on and you figure it out, which
Yeah.
a
Yeah. I
lot of
like to
people get
turn
scared of
negative.
it and don't touch it, and then they become further removed from it, and that doesn't help either.
Doesn't help. Doesn't help.
Well, Joe, one of the things I always ask everybody, and I'm curious to hear what your answer is to this, but you've lived, you know, like you're writing a memoir. It should be, it
Hmm.
should be a book. But
Hmm.
what do you think's your biggest takeaway through the journey that you've been on up until now?
Hmm. I think the biggest thing, there are two that comes to mind, but one is that all of us, don't have to be defined by the worst decision we've made. It's
I love
really
that.
that simple. I refuse. I mean, again, to this day, I feel awful. I feel awful about what I did, right? I responded, reacted, wasn't thinking, right? Put myself in those spaces, so to speak.
Mhm.
So, I mean, those I can't undo. But that said, that doesn't define me. That's not me. That's not
Yeah,
who my mother didn't raise. That's not who my mother raised.
yeah,
And so for me, it is holding on to the fact that we are all human and that no matter what we've done or didn't do or failed to do or whatever, that we are more than those decisions or the indecisions or things that we haven't done. So I think it's that. I think it's that. And another thing that I think is closely related is that we all, I believe, have the capacity to do good things and to be resilient. To be resilient,
yes.
right? They had, I forgot who said it, but somebody said, was quoted as saying, "It's not how many times you fall down that matters; it's how many times you get
How many
back
times you
up."
get back up? And you got to have a
And that's
reason
what
to
it's
get back
about.
up.
Yeah. So that's
Yeah.
it.
So good.
Hmm.
Such great nuggets of wisdom, Joe, all the way
Yeah.
through this.
Yeah.
I've uh if people want to get a hold of you, I know you've got mindfulmoneyllc@gmail.com.
Yes.
Uh
Yes.
I'm assuming that your book, Think Outside the Cell, is available
On Amazon.
on
It's on
Amazon.
Amazon.
And you've
Yep.
got other books too, by the way. There's like
Got other
three of
books.
them.
The other books, the 3 books in a series, those we're not selling. My wife and I started a nonprofit foundation when I was inside.
Yeah,
The Think Outside the Cell Foundation. It's all but defunct now. We haven't been active, but
yeah.
we got a grant some years ago and we're able to produce 3 books. But I got
That's
other
great.
books coming out. I got one that's going to profile formerly incarcerated people who are now successful entrepreneurs. So that's going to be coming out next
Love
year.
that.
My memoir is going to come out next December because we lost one of our brothers whose birthday is December 5th. So I want to honor him by coming out with my book around that time. And then lastly, I'm going to have a book about ghostwriting. So it's going to be about for people who are either in prison or outside of prison who want to tell their stories, but don't feel like they're good writers.
Yep.
Right. But they have amazing stories
There's
or
a need for
fascinating
that.
stories. And
Mhm.
so I just, earlier today, I was talking with a company that helps with ghostwriting. And so I want to bring this audience, my audience, to that space.
I
Right.
love
There's
that.
stories to be told. So that's what I'm working on. But I'll lastly say I'm going to be doing in April, I'm going to be doing an event that the first type of event like this where we basically have some wine, have a good time, but we talk finance, we talk personal finance. So I've got to work through some of that stuff. I'm going to do speaking engagements and some coaching, and it's going to be a big year, 2024.
You are a man on the move, Joe.
Yes,
Man on the
yes,
move. All
yes.
right. Well, I appreciate so much you taking the time out today, because your story is going to help people. The listeners are going to love your story.
Yep.
Check out Think Outside the Cell on Amazon. Check out my book, Nightmare Success, on Amazon.
Yeah.
For those people out there, I'm loving you guys on social media, the likes, follow the show, subscribe, comments are great. Leave reviews on Apple. They put the show on steroids. If you want to know more about what I got going on, BrentCassidy.com. It's with a TY, not a DY. And as I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Joe Robinson, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you. It was a pleasure. All right. You take care.
Nightmare Success, in and out.